Nurses were inserted into these patients' lives and their family lives while this really critical experience is happening. And to be able to just sit with them at this time, or at least educate them, with what's going on, or try to make sure that the family is there when someone's dying, feels just really powerful. It's meaningful work.
My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too.
What up? Happy week, all, or sad week, y'all, depending on how you're feeling. Welcome back. This is Chelsea London Lloyd. You have found the Dying of Laughter podcast. Thank you for being here. Every week we talk to entertainment and wellness experts, along with many a comedian, about the loss of their parents and siblings. Summer, baby, it is hot. It is super hot. I've been seeing people post things like it's 122 here. I saw someone is wedding location scouting in Palm Springs, and it's like 125 or something. One of my good friends who lives in Portland said that they have a crazy heat wave and they had to escape to Seattle. It's like 112 in Portland or something like that, which is wild. I'm really excited because I'm going to Hawaii this weekend. Oh my goodness. I'm just going for 3 nights with my boyfriend. We're kind of really into the weekend thing. I mean, for work and stuff, for his work, it's hard to leave for a week, even with virtual. And then you don't feel like you're missing things. Hey, if you can get away for 2 weeks, totally do it. I think that's incredible. But also just reminding everyone that the weekend trip, it's underrated. You know what I mean? You can get a lot done in a weekend. And it'll be 4 long days. Leave in the morning, get back at night. So 4 days in Hawaii, you really can get a lot done. And we're in LA. It's a 5-hour flight. If you're on the East Coast, that wouldn't make sense, obviously. But if you can get there and you can find a good package like we did, hallelujah. Amex packages are incredible. My Amex card has changed my life. I actually get paid to have an Amex card. I should do an episode about that because you get so many points and perks back. People are like, it's an expensive annual fee. And I'm like, well, let me prove you wrong, because I actually make more money having the card than I did before. So that's wild. So we'll be in Oahu for a few days. Cannot wait. And speaking of Portland, I mentioned the heat wave in Portland. Today's incredible guest comes to us from the lovely city of Portland. I cannot wait to go behind the scenes of Hospice today. We have the incredible Beth Cavenaugh as this week's guest. She's a certified hospice and palliative care nurse and educator with over 14 years of experience in caring for terminally ill patients. She's been a registered nurse for over 24 years and holds a bachelor's degree in nursing from Creighton University. Beth has supported hundreds of patients and their families at inpatient units, in the home setting, and behind the scenes in hospice care. We also discussed the loss of both of her parents. Beth lost her mom to lung cancer when she was in her 20s. Beth was in her 20s, not her mom, I should say. And her dad died in a sudden cardiac event. Beth is also the author of her new book, Some Light at the End, which will help you find support to understand the end-of-life process. It is a very tender yet transparent guide to your final days. So thank you so much, Beth, for writing this book, for opening up about everything you've been through today. And I've always wanted to know, what is it like behind the scenes of hospice? Behind the scenes is kind of a bizarre term, but for lack of better words, I had so many questions about, is hospice available to everyone and how do you sign up? So she will cover all of that. And she also asks me some questions about my own dad's paralysis and the end of his life. Special thank you to Beth for being here. You can check out her book, Some Light at the End, at her website, bethcavenaugh.com, Cavenaugh. This will be really, really illuminating for anyone who has questions about getting their person or loved one signed up for hospice. So shout out to Beth for the info. Thanks, guys, for being here, and I will talk to you next week. Well, thank you so much, Beth, for being here. It's so wonderful to speak with you today. If you don't mind sharing with listeners a little bit about what you do and your fabulous book, and then we'll get started with some questions.
Well, right now I am a hospice nurse, and I've been a hospice nurse for about 15 years. I've been a nurse for about 25 years. And yeah, so I work at a small 20-bed facility that just strictly serves people who are at the end of their life. I work part-time, and I wrote a book about end-of-life care, basically from my perspective as a hospice nurse, because I see so many patients, their families kind of struggling with, how do I actually take care of my loved one at the end of their life? And hospice nurses have so many of the same questions that we get asked over and over. And I wanted to provide a resource that was kind of like, it's not light, it's not a light topic at all, but I wanted it to be kind of a soft, gentle way to introduce people to the end of life and how to care for your loved one when they're dying.
Beautiful. I love what you're saying about, yeah, it's not light. It's like this podcast, for instance, it's not about it being funny, but it is about being accessible and having an entry into these more difficult or traditionally, quote unquote, darker topics, which certainly can be seen that way.
Right.
I mean, I'm just thrilled to speak with you because I think it's so interesting that you've been doing this for such a long time. A question that I ask everyone at the beginning of this show is about your goldfish moment. And your goldfish moment is the first time you thought about or conceptualized death in some way. For some people, it was a goldfish. Is there a moment in your childhood that comes to mind?
Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
The one that does is when our dog, Heidi, died. She was old. I don't even know how old, 14. And she was just lying in the dirt, and our whole family was standing around her, and she died. And I think that's when I lived in this house that we had a lot of animals throughout my life. So it felt kind of normal and natural. But at the same time, I was shaken to the core, I think, because I watched her die. That was kind of alarming to me. So that's my goldfish moment. I didn't really love it.
Fair. They're not lovable moments, certainly.
Right.
That's interesting when you said that you watched her die. I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, that's
thanks.
difficult.
It's okay. I mean, like I said, we lived on this funny property where my dad always brought in animals. And so we had this ongoing open door policy of like hamsters, cats, chickens, dogs, ducks, just a lot of different animals. And we lived near a canyon. So actually there were a lot of more violent deaths than peaceful deaths. So Heidi's, the dog's death, was actually one of the more peaceful ones on the property.
Really?
So yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Can you share a little bit about who you grew up with, who was in your family unit?
Okay. Family unit. My mom, my dad, and there were 5 kids. And I grew up in Southern California, Orange County, California, about 20 minutes away from Disneyland. And it was it's 72 degrees down there all the time. It's getting hotter, but it was kind of a magical childhood, honestly, just because we were free range children and just got to run around wherever we wanted to go, and roller skating and, biking all over the place. So.
Love that. Where were you in the pecking order of 5 kids? I don't know why, but I must know. I must know this information.
Because birth order impacts things, yes. Doesn't it? I was 4th, and I'm still 4th out of 5.
Awesome. Were you guys close growing up? Like, I feel like it'd be so fun to be with 5 kids. Was it like your besties? Not really, a mixture?
It was a mixture. I would say we were all close. We were a really fun family. We like to hang out together and have parties together and stuff. But I was, my youngest sister, Ann, and we were really close just because we didn't really party. And the older 3, they were kind of wild, like really wild and super fun. And I was maybe a little more afraid and tentative and scared. So Ann and I kind of hung out in the corner, just like playing with dolls and stuff. So we were the younger 2. Yeah.
Love. Okay. Maybe this means something, maybe it doesn't, but connection moment. I love a connection moment. So your name is Beth, your sister's name is Ann. My first name is legally Chelsea Ann. I just go by Chelsea at this point. My grandmother was named Ann, and my sister's name is Courtney Beth.
Whoa.
So that is interesting.
Whoa,
right?
that is connection moments. I
Right?
love it.
Right? How funny. As soon as you said that, I was like, that's us, kind
Do you
of.
have two? Do you have just one other sibling?
Yeah, just the two.
Okay.
And I'm older, so cool times. Anyways, this whole podcast could just be us talking about our childhoods and who we relate to. No, I promise I'll get to other things. Well, I'm sure you're asked this in your podcast interviews, but I'm so curious. How did you get involved in nursing and specifically in hospice? Is it something that you became interested in at a certain age? Was there a light bulb moment? Did it evolve naturally? Tell us about how you got here.
Yeah, I don't, it's funny because I don't have a light bulb moment at all. Like, I think I look back on my life and I feel like it's just kind of this culmination of events that lead me to certain places. I really try hard to have a piece of my heart involved in all my decisions that I make, ideally. So it just kind of, I feel like I had this circuitous route that led me to nursing. My first bachelor's was in political science, and I had it never even occurred to me to be a nurse. And after college, I did this volunteer program where I went into nursing homes, and we were like mental health therapists. And I was grossly underqualified for the position, but I drove patients around to like ostrich farms and Dairy Queen. And we were support groups for anybody who had a diagnosis of anxiety or depression, which was just about everybody in the nursing home at that time. This was back in 1991. But I loved working in the nursing homes. It was so awesome just to be with these elderly people who really had a lot to share and a lot to give. And so I started nursing school shortly after that. It took me a couple more years to get my bachelor's in nursing, but that's what led me to nursing. And then hospice was kind of it was just kind of an ongoing, I don't really know. I worked in a nursing home. So my very first job out of nursing school was in a nursing home, but I only stayed there for 3 weeks because I was in charge of like 33 patients on an Alzheimer's unit at night. And it was just felt too scary for me as a new nurse to be in charge of so many people. So I quit that job and decided not to do geriatrics right away. And I did have a hospice job right after that at this really sweet, it was an AIDS hospice home. Now it's more like a residential center for people living with HIV. But that was kind of an incredible place to start my work as a nurse, because they really told me outright, like, we are paying you, which was $11 at the time an hour. We are paying you to sit with patients. We want you to be present for them when they die. We want you to show up for them. You don't have to run around and get your tasks done in a certain amount of time. We want you to get all your stuff done, but really presence is the most important thing. So I had these extraordinary mentors that really helped to encourage me to, nursing is such a busy sport. And so these nurses were really good about kind of stopping me in my tracks and just encouraging me to sit. It was pretty incredible. But then hospice just kind of came later. My mom died of lung cancer back in 1998, a couple of years later. And I don't know, I mean, my nursing just kind of kept on going. And then about a decade into being a nurse, I decided to try out hospice as a professional. And I just felt like I landed, it felt really right and really good.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it's just incredible what you're talking about. The power of presence can be overlooked. It's not about minimalizing anything down to one thing, but the power of presence in sitting with people during difficult times, specifically at the end of their lives, is just, I think it's one of the most noble, incredible things you can do. So first of all, thank you for doing that. And can you share about a recent experience perhaps that particularly impacted you that might be helpful for listeners out there to learn from you? Like, what is it like sitting with a patient at the end of their life?
I honestly feel like it is one of the most incredible privileges. And I know privilege is probably overutilized in the hospice world, but really, that is what most of us feel like from the bottom of our toes, is that it's a privilege to be with people at this time. For me, I feel like it's such a sacred, holy time. And I'm not super religious, but I feel like there's this divine, mystical massive event that's happening. And to be able, nurses, we're inserted into these patients' lives and their family lives while this really critical experience is happening. And to be able to just sit with them at this time, or at least educate them, with what's going on, or try to make sure that the family is there when someone's dying, feels just really powerful. It's meaningful work. I mean, probably like what you do, Chelsea. I mean, it feels really meaningful when you know that you've been able to allow more peace at the end of life. I do a lot of modeling of behavior. So I'll just kind of hold a patient's hand, or I'll like place my hand on their arm and just say, hi, Bob, it's me, Beth, I'm your nurse, so that people know they can talk to the patient, even though they're dying and non-responsive. I'll encourage kids. I mean, this is right now with COVID, we still have all these regulations and restrictions, but I try to encourage kids to, like, if they are there in the room, to, they can talk to their grandma and tell them that they love them and their grandma can hear them. And just kind of giving people permission to do what they want to do, or also I'll say, and if you don't want to, you can sit here, you can just like draw a little picture for grandma, or you can sit outside in the room. I mean, I think it's important to offer people a lot of choices in terms of what their comfort level is, because not everybody is really comfortable with sitting with somebody who's dying. So I like to honor that too as well.
Right. Oh, that's such a sweet image of little kids drawing things for their grandparents. Like, my heart is just like bursting and breaking. I thought about a more eloquent way that I could ask you this question, but I'm really just going to ask it in a bare bones way. How do you keep it together for all of these people? I have assumptions that maybe it gets quote unquote easier over time. And yet it's such a special, profound, deep moment with each individual. How do you do it? I try to think of a better way to ask, but I would love to hear from you. I mean, it's just incredible.
God, I think that it's, when it's your family, it's very different. I mean, I've had my mom die, my dad die. Like, it is a very different experience when it's your own people. And kind of all bets are off. I think when it comes down to that, even for me, for a lot of medical professionals, I know when it's their own family, it's really, the wheels fall off the wagon. But when I first started in hospice, about a year into it, I started to get kind of depressed and kind of grumpy in general. And so I was asking, because there was so much suffering, and I felt the weight of responsibility to like make it a good death. And, maybe I had a couple deaths that weren't so wonderful. And I had asked a lot of my mentors, and one person showed me this palliative care textbook that said that there's 5 stages of working in end-of-life care. And the third stage is, after about a year of doing it, you get depressed. And I was kind of bummed that nobody really told me that, that was insight. But if you keep at it, I don't remember what the other 2 stages are. And I can't remember the woman's name who has this theoretical framework, but there are 2 other stages. That's basically, self-actualization and just kind of like being comfortable with the dying process. So, that's after a year of me probably dealing with, I don't know, I mean, many deaths, being present for many deaths and many, many patients. So I think ideally you don't get numb to it. I think that I still like to feel sadness and a lot of depth for my patients and their experiences. But there is this acceptance, it's just kind of an acceptance of death, and that this is what happens. And most of us don't like it. And most of us don't like it when our mom or dad dies. But from someone who's seen it happen so many times, I just kind of realized, like, this is just a really important part of life. Now, granted, if I get diagnosed tomorrow with a terminal illness, I'm not so sure I'll be so graceful right away. I think I would need to kind of work through my own shit, basically, to get to some level of my own acceptance around dying. But as a nurse and a professional, I feel like you have to do a lot of grounding exercises too. I do a lot of self-care stuff where I kind of do some meditation, or I'll, always go for walks and, just take care of myself that way so that I can show up and be composed and as compassionate as I can be. Some days are prettier than others.
Sure, absolutely. And I know in your book, you're talking about activities and meditations to navigate anxiety and grief. And I don't want to give too much away, but what advice might you have for someone who recently found out that their parent or close loved one is terminally ill?
Well, I think all bets are off. I think there's no right way to do it. I think that everybody has their own way of acknowledging a death, or not acknowledging it, or avoiding it, or denying it. So I think we all have there's a gamut of acceptance that happens. And my guess is people who are listening to your podcast are a little more in the place of acceptance of death and that it's a part of life. But, taking care of yourself is really important, whatever that means, and in healthy, sustainable ways. It could be walks. It could be meditation. I have struggled for years trying to instill a meditation practice. Some months I'm better at it than others. Some months I don't do it at all. So I don't know if that's the end all be all. I do think it's very helpful though. I think sleep and exercise and, all those yada, yada, yada things are important. I think that when I found out my mom had cancer, being a nurse, I looked it up and I realized like lung cancer has maybe 5 years. And so for me, I'm a very practical person and pragmatic. And I thought, okay, like, shoot, I only have 5 years left with my mom. So there's some beauty in a terminal illness that you can make some decisions about what you want to do and how you want to spend your time and your money. And so when I could get off work, I would fly down and visit my mom. And I tried to do that as much as I could and as much as my work would allow me to. And also just checking in, with her more frequently, and kind of puts your life into this it can put your life into a good perspective.
Absolutely. And I know we're jumping around a little bit, so thanks for bearing with me. I was going to ask you about the differences between what it was like losing your mom in your 20s versus losing your dad. And so speaking now of your mother, I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little bit more on that experience. And I'm curious, how old were you when she was diagnosed, and what was it like going through the diagnosis with her?
I was probably 26 when my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And, I was shattered and I was pregnant with my second daughter, Grace, and I had a son, Jack. I can't really remember, but I know I had my son, Jack. And then as my mom got closer to dying, I was pregnant with Grace. So, it's just this kind of jolt of anticipatory grief that you get every day that your babies aren't going to know your mom. So I was pretty depressed, actually, especially after my mom died. I probably had a year of just kind of overwhelming exhaustion and sadness, which I think is actually probably standard grief. And it was a lot to bear, really. I mean, it was really hard. It's hard to lose your mama, no matter what. So that was tough. And she lived for about 15 months. And I went down, Jack and I, he's my son, we flew down and we took care of her for the last 3 months of her life with the rest of my siblings. We all kind of did our best. I mean, it wasn't like, I wouldn't call us like excellent caregivers, but we really tried our best. It was kind of messy at times, but those are things you feel pretty darn good about when you look back over the course of your life. Like, I'm so glad I was able to do that. And that was because my nurse manager said, Beth, you can take FEMLA. And I said, what the heck is FEMLA? I don't even know what you're talking about, but it was family medical leave, which I just had no idea I could do that. I mean, you don't get paid, but it was great to know that that was an option. So I feel really lucky that I was able to do that.
Wow. I'm glad that you're mentioning FEMLA. If anyone's listening and didn't know that was an option, of course, depending on what they're doing. And yeah, I'm so glad that you were able to be with her. And yeah, I'm sorry to hear about short diagnoses like that. I speak to a lot of people who that is the case. And, with my dad, it was the opposite of so many years. And I think that just must have been difficult, and being young and pregnant and too. So thank you for sharing a little bit more about that.
Can I ask you how was it to have, your dad died over the course of 15 years?
Yes.
And you don't have to answer, but I'm just curious how that was.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, thank you for asking. I appreciate it. It was interesting. Just that's the first one. It was interesting. He was for a few years undiagnosed and having wild symptoms, which is interesting. Even that was a long time ago at this point. So he thinks he had it a lot longer than he even did. I think he was officially diagnosed when I was 7 or 8. I say 4 because, he was dropping forks. Like, what's that all about? And they didn't know for a few years what that was. Now I think they would catch things a little bit faster. But no, I would say the most interesting things were just grieving the different phases and just kind of the exhaustion that comes with that. He was completely paralyzed by the time I was 12. So for like 7 or 8 years, he didn't move at all. And so
was he at home? At care home?
No, so he was at home for the first, however I'm getting all the day. Yeah, so when I was like 4 to 12. So he was at home for a long time, and then after a certain point, my mom romance is totally out the window. He was like 6'4". She couldn't carry a paralyzed person. So, fortunately, he was able to go to a care home, even though that wasn't great, I think, for like kid dynamics. It's definitely was the best thing for him. And unfortunately, it's not accessible to everyone to be able to do that. And that's a whole other issue. But yeah, I was in and out of this care home for a long time. So I have so much respect for how much time you spend in one, which is all the time. Thank you again for what you're doing.
I think those people in the care homes are pretty incredible. And most, like I said, I'm a part-time nurse. So, a lot of them work 40 hours and they are devoted.
It's really inspiring. And I don't think I fully appreciated till I was older. And I think it was weird too, because people were in and out of there. It was a short care situation. He thought doctors would say, you have 2 years left, blah, 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 or whatever they said. And then he kept living and living, which is great and expensive and bizarre. And you're paralyzed and just, all the things. But he lived a long time. What can I say? And I always say, like, it's better to have had that experience, I think, or instead of dying sooner. It depends on the individual as to what their wishes are. But even part of the, impetus for my involvement in grief spaces was inspired from when my mom was diagnosed when I was 25 with stage 4. I started doing all of these, programs and volunteer work in anticipation of, sorry, Mom, if you're listening, but she knows this, what am I going to do without my second parent? And yet, fortunately, she 5 years is here and doing well. So that's, hey, I'm very grateful. It is the better of the two outcomes. And yet it's mentally exhausting to think about, well, best case scenario, she has something for a really long time. And that's my second experience with that. So it's just, it's interesting. But thank you for asking. I'm sorry, that was a little bit of a tangent. So I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you for sharing.
I appreciate you asking. Okay, so you're talking about, in this book, you also mention strategies to handle practicalities and dealing with common medical symptoms, as well as after-death care rituals. I'm really interested in both of those things. Can we talk a little bit about strategies to handle the practicalities around grief? I think people get really stressed out when there's a diagnosis, and then some of that can go by the wayside. So are there a few things that you've seen really help out individuals and their families?
Yes, let's see. I think that it's important to throw all your expectations out the window. Don't have any. I mean, I really thought that when my mom was dying that we were going to have these really intimate talks about her life and, how she wanted to die and what she wanted afterwards. And we had a little bit of that, but she really didn't want to talk about it with me. And things just don't go. I mean, even though like in my book, I kind of talk about the phases of dying and what it looks like to die. But there's this caveat where death happens so individually for each individual person. And sometimes deaths are rapid, sometimes they're slow progression, like your dad's. Sometimes there's a surprise terminal event that happens. Sometimes, I mean, patients have died while I'm sitting there talking with family members about the weather. And I didn't even know, I'm an experienced hospice nurse, and I didn't realize that this was going to happen. So things happen that you just almost can't anticipate. But there's plenty of things you can anticipate. So other ways of handling the grief is, I'm a big fan of arming yourself with knowledge and information and kind of, usually any hospice has some kind of a binder that has a lot of information in it for you about end of life. And it's just really nice to reference and read so that you kind of know what to expect, so that when all of a sudden your mom's having a hard time swallowing, you don't keep trying to force feed her the hamburger, but you can go get some yogurt and ice cream and things that are easier to swallow. Or, oh my God, mom's very weak. What are we going to do? Well, that happens all the time. Like most hospice patients get really weak, and then you need to get a hospital bed and you need to get a bedside commode and they need assistance in the shower. So some of it is just like arming yourself with knowledge so that you don't feel so overwhelmed and afraid by this terminal event that you're probably going to be involved in, meaning you're going to probably be caring for your mom or dad at some point during the course of their illness. So things like that, always taking care of yourself, grabbing as many people as you can to help out, ask for help with meals. I mean, a lot of people don't really know what to offer, in this space of grief, but people are more than willing and want to help. They just need direction. So I think asking friends for meals just to alleviate mental burden, or help with trips to the grocery store or the pharmacy. And hospice also has a team of people that is there for the patient, but also for the family. So I think a lot of people, all the resources, I think, are not as utilized as well as they could be, mostly because people don't really know what the social worker is doing or what the chaplain does or what the CNA, the home health aide, does. And they can all be incredible support and alleviate some of the emotional burden that other people have, that you have while you're taking care of somebody who's dying at the end of their life. So those are my things right off the top of my head.
Yeah, thank you. Do you mind sharing what a day in the life of a hospice nurse looks like? I know it's so different every day, but even I don't really know. I mean, when you get there, like, do you have multiple people you're assigned to? Is it one at a time? Does it depend? Does every family want something different from what you're offering? I'm curious if you could share more about that.
Yeah, well, so I work at an inpatient unit, so there's 20 beds, and inpatient units are very rare. It's strictly for hospice and end-of-life care, and they're very rare because it's hard to be financially stable, sustainable as a hospice unit, just because of payment rates and yada, yada, yada. So I usually I think we take up to 6 patients, and we're usually just kind of, going from patient to patient and giving them what they need. And then whether it be pain management or, helping with their breathing or giving them meds or, educating the family about end of life or, just talking. And then we work with CNAs, and we have a social worker and a chaplain on site also who can provide a lot of the emotional, spiritual support. But most hospice occurs in a patient's home or like a facility, like where your dad was. And so I've done home hospice before, which means you're like in your car, you got your computer, you got your bag of, stethoscope, all those things. And you go from home to home, and you might visit maybe 5 patients in the course of a day. And, I love doing that. I find that one of the most challenging jobs ever because you have to have all of your tools in your trunk, and you've got to, you follow GPS down these unknown roads, and you take a right on this dirt road and a left down here. And so home hospice is really hard because there's these external challenges presented just because you're driving to people's homes, but there's so much beauty in being able to witness where somebody's being taken care of. You see so much more of their life, the pictures of the grandbabies and like family in and out and friends in and out. I mean, there's something really special about doing home hospice nursing. It is a hard job though, I think. And yeah, so I think most case managers for hospice, so that means the nurse who's the primary nurse, they usually have maybe 10 to 12 patients. I don't know, that could, it depends on each hospice, but they see them throughout the course of the week. And they visit the home maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
Got it. Thank you. This is helpful. I mean, yeah, these are things that I don't even know. So I really appreciate getting to learn more about it. And this might be an obvious question, but how does one access hospice? And is it accessible to everyone who wants it? Is it expensive? Are there programs to subsidize it? What does that look like?
Well, where I've only worked in nonprofit hospices, and most of them were attached to a hospital system. So Medicare is generally the main funder for hospice. And that's, of course, for people who are age 65 and over and have Medicare. There's a hospice benefit that pays for the team. But like our facility, Medicare doesn't pay for somebody to stay there. They don't pay for the room and board, but they'll pay for the medical care. And usually the room and board has to be out of pocket. There's so many nuances, and it's so boring, and I won't go into all the details, but generally Medicare pays for hospice care, your hospice team, which means we are not a caregiving service. We pretty much are care managers. So we oversee care. We don't move into the home and take care of dad. Like the family still has to take care of the dad. We are available 24/7 on the phone, and we can visit urgently if needed. So we just kind of help support the family, make sure they have the medications they need for their symptoms. And if they don't have Medicare, so if they're under 65, usually if they have insurance, usually insurance has some type of hospice benefit. And if they don't have insurance, a lot of times hospitals or hospices have some type of charity fund so they can pay for that patient.
That's good to know. And if someone who has no idea about any of this, they've just found out their mom or dad is dying, they don't know what the insurance situation is, hopefully they do, but let's just say, can they Google hospice local chapter to their area? Is there a hospice kind of everywhere around the United States at least? And then you just call them and say, here's what's going on. What steps can we take next? Is that sort of what happens?
I mean, you can definitely do that. I think rural hospices, obviously, there's few and far between. I mean, they exist, but I mean, they're just less of them. Like in where I live in a city, we have at least 16 hospices that you can choose from. Most people get signed on to hospice when their physician says, you know what, now might be a good time for hospice. We've tried everything. The chemo's not really working anymore. We think you could really benefit from hospice support, which means, no more aggressive treatment, no more hospitalizations. And so 2 physicians have to agree that the patient is terminally ill to qualify for hospice, among other things. I mean, there's all this criteria for how you determine if somebody is eligible for hospice. And for like ALS, I think patients, your dad was paralyzed for 8 years.
Something like that, yeah.
I mean, that's such a long time. But I mean, they can't swallow, and they can't do, when they can't swallow, a lot of ALS people get tube feeding. So you have to kind of make all these decisions about not doing life prolonging care.
Exactly. That is exactly the drama of my family's life. But yes, keep going. Keep going.
It's so, I mean, it's so intense. It's so intense. I have to start writing down the questions because I keep forgetting where I'm going. I keep going off on all these random
No,
tangents.
it's perfect. We love a tangent moment, and they're not tangential. They're extremely informative answers. So
It's just I'm not able, I can't circle back. So I'm going to try harder next time. Sorry.
no, it's great. This is how this goes. Anything that's like too formal and structured on podcasts is not interesting anyways. But yeah, no, my dad for the last year and a half, I want to say, he didn't speak any longer. And that was, I mean, it's just a movie, right? I mean, but he was fully conscious, right? So he communicated via his eyes. And now, of course, there's really sophisticated technology, but then it was blinking at letters at a whiteboard to, spell it out. So it'd take like an hour to spell out. And we were making big decisions, or, I was 18, 19, but my mom, right, was making these big decisions that fortunately / unfortunately, because he had been sick for a long time, there were things in place. And yet, like I'm sure you've seen, there's still always something that happens. And you don't plan for how long am I not going to speak before I die, like no one really thinks that will happen, or if they do, they don't know. And so, I'm glad that there's services like yours and there's books like yours to get people thinking about these things. It's really awkward to have these conversations with your loved ones, but it's even more awkward and difficult to have them amongst yourselves trying to decide things, not knowing what they want, right?
It's awful. Yeah. I mean, it's really grueling. And I've been with many families trying to make decisions in a crisis moment. And it is just, you can just see their heart, and soul being shredded by these decisions if they aren't already made. And, granted, I'm sure I think it's important to do advance directives and then update them every couple of years because, you just don't know how you're going to feel at age 50 versus 35 versus, 85. So
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. What advice do you have for people now in terms of getting into these conversations with their loved ones? I know there's a great site called Lantern where you can write things down online. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, or even if it's just like a pen and paper. Do you suggest people have these conversations, write things down? Do you want to be on life support? Do you want to be cremated or buried? Like, how do you suggest people go about that? I know it's so uncomfortable, even for me, we're talking to my mom about it, but I just think it has to be done. I mean, we have to do it. So yeah, I'm curious what you think about that.
I mean, I do feel like the families that have direction from the person who's dying are in a much better space than people who don't have direction. It is grueling to make decisions, and it is a gift that you give to your loved ones. And when you have made some decisions about what you want in your life, and like I said, revisit it write out every state has an advance directive, worksheet, and then you need to get it maybe notarized or something like that. I'm sorry. I don't really know, but you kind of need something formal. You need to have somebody who's going to make healthcare decisions for you if you're unable to. And like you're talking about, I mean, with your dad, you never could have anticipated that he wasn't going to be able to talk for a year and a half. Things come up all the time, with healthcare situations that you're like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen. What does dad want now? But I think like knowing what people want, like for some people, like mom, you can ask your mom, what's important to you right now? Like, what does quality of life mean for you right now? It might mean watching, Game of Thrones and drinking a glass of wine. That's easy to do, right? Like if that's quality of life, great. Like that's, as long as you can do that, then we know that life is still good for you and meaningful. Or maybe it's just important to see your grandbabies once a week. I don't know. Just have conversation about what's important to them, what's meaningful for them, what you would want. I mean, I think tube feeding is, when I think about your dad and ALS and tube feeding, I mean, people can stay alive for a very long time on tube feeding. And I've seen a lot of patients where they're alive, but not living. And, maybe that's what they wanted, which is great. I'm totally up for doing any of that stuff. And a lot of families, it's a really hard decision to make once you start some kind of life support to actually take the life support away, so that's why it's nice to have these conversations and ideas about what you want, so you don't have to remove these life-sustaining measures. Does that make sense?
It does, unfortunately, all too well. No, I hope anyone listening who has, been avoiding having these conversations can just go for it. And heck, leave a voicemail if you have to do it. I mean, if you have to do it over email, please do it in person or over the phone. But whatever you need to do to get some answers, right, I think is just so much better than not. Yeah, my dad was alive for a long time. And the last few years were, even when he couldn't talk, the last few, he talked really slow and slurring. So it's like, at a certain point, he wanted to stay alive as long as possible. And then all of a sudden he didn't, but he wasn't sure when. And we're talking through eyes and he's like, maybe next week. Okay, no, actually, no, I'm good. What about tomorrow? Blah, blah, blah. And, like a movie. But my poor mom, I have a newfound level of respect for anyone who has to make those decisions. And I know it's a lot of people and it's not easy.
It's a lot of people, yeah.
Hopefully they're 104 and you're just kind of like, well, they're 104. But as you've seen, there's people of all ages. I'm wondering if there's anyone listening who is losing someone younger, perhaps a sibling or a friend. What has that been like for you? Have you worked with younger people? Of course, that's extremely difficult, the most difficult. And what has that looked like for you? And what have you seen that's been positive? What have those people said or asked for that has been surprising or beautiful? What has that looked like?
Yeah. When you say young, like give me an age range.
I don't know. That's hard. Yeah, I guess a good point. I'm just thinking of because I feel like you associate hospice with older people.
Right.
Because the majority of people are older, but there could be someone in their 20s or 30s who is dying. And so I think the number I'm thinking is 20s or 30s. Yeah.
Well, it's brutal for obvious reasons. Too young, too soon, too everything. Unfair, like not enough life lived. Like I said earlier, one of my first jobs was at an AIDS hospice. And so we actually had a lot of people. I was 25, I think, or 26 actually, when I was working there. And I had a lot of patients that were my age, young patients dying from AIDS. And it was so intense and so beautiful at the same time, because that's also when there's so many friends involved and they just like friends flock. It's like this magnetic pull. So I think if you can show up, like if you do have somebody who's been diagnosed and they're one of your friends, just keep showing up. Like that's the most important thing, because you are much more relatable than their mother or father, or, I think I'm assuming, but that's who they want to be around. Right. My 23-year-old son, I know that he wouldn't necessarily want me.
Your son is 23 now?
Yeah. I know it's been a while. So I know he wouldn't want me hanging around his bedside all the time. He'd much rather have, his friends and stuff hanging around his bedside. Really. So I just think having friends around and kind of normalizing, it's a beautiful gift you can give to people, actually, to let them into your life at this moment and to just be with them. And, you can watch TV together. You can just listen to music. You can play music together. I think just showing up for people at this stage is one of the most profound things you can do.
Love it. And I think that circles back to what you were talking about at the beginning and the power of presence and sitting there. And it's not about asking a bunch of questions necessarily or doing this. People are like, what can I do? What can I do? And I think it's really overlooked of just being there. Like you said, showing up. Is there anything else on the power of presence specifically that's coming up for you? Is there something that you specifically do or say when you're sitting next to someone dying that you have found like, wow, this question or this sentiment or this kind of moment is really powerful?
I think a lot of people feel nervous about doing it. And I think breathing techniques are really good. And by breathing techniques, I mean just breathing, like tapping into your breath, like keep it simple, tapping into your breath so that you stay. And one of the best pieces of advice I got from another nurse was, you don't have to say anything. They have these big questions that come up. Why me? Why now? I was hiking, 3 months ago, and look at me now. I have colon cancer and I'm going to die. And, the doctor says a couple of months. So I think just being able to go, yeah, I'm so sorry. God, that sucks. Like, you just don't have to have answers, and you don't have to have a lot of questions. So I think there's a lot of power in silence, and still being with them as they wade through this like murky mystery of life, just kind of staying with them through this. There have been so many times I've thought, oh, okay, I got this. Like, some gal will say, God, I can't believe I'm dying. I'm 50. I have 3 kids. What am I gonna say to them? And I'll sit down and I'll think, oh, this is great. Like, I totally have answers for her. And then all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed with this. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm so sorry. Like, I don't even know what you're gonna do, but I'm here, and you can talk it out with me if you want, or if you don't want to, or maybe I'll go get the chaplain or the social worker, or, it's just, you just don't have to have answers.
I love that. I think I mean, I'm not even going to say anything. I don't have to have an answer to that. I'm just going to sit here in silence and absorb what you're saying.
Yeah, it's simple, but it's helpful.
So, so helpful. And I'll just ask you just a couple more things here. Yeah, I'll just share this. I had an experience last year that was pretty transformative that I speak to a little bit on the pod, but the Big Sisters program, like Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Yeah, mentorship. So it's called Walk with Sally in LA. It's the equivalent of that, but specific to cancer families. So I decided to do it last year, inspired by everything going on. And I speak to a lot of adults about their loss. And I thought, okay, I can do this with a child. But anyways, I was matched with a little girl whose mom had breast cancer, because my mom did too. And that's a match, and blah, blah, blah. And then unfortunately, her mother unexpectedly, within a few months of the diagnosis, didn't make it. And it was my first experience really sitting there and walking through someone through this. And of course it shouldn't have been me, and that's no diss to me. Of course this little girl should have formal therapy and this and X and Y and Z, and she's from a very underprivileged community, and that's not realistic. I mean, just talk about different classes in society. Everyone I talk to about it would say, well, does she have a therapist? I'm like, she hasn't been in school in a year. She doesn't have anything. Like, I of course tried, and I am still trying to get her into therapy, and it looks like at some point that would happen, but these things and X and Y and Z. So I was the person that walked her through, and her mom was wonderful. And we met her many times and told her mom, I'm going to be there and do these things. And she also is from one single parent home. So it's just, anyways, it's still recent. And today's her birthday, actually. She's turning 10, and she's adorable.
10. Oh my God.
Such a little cutie. And I'm sorry. Thanks for holding the space while I share that. And I of course cannot imagine what your experiences are, but even from having this one, it's a really, really challenging space to be in. And I'm sure you have all these tools and are quote unquote used to it, and yet I just really, really respect what you are doing in your fields and what people in hospice are doing, because wow, I mean, that took a toll on me, and that's one person, and you're doing it every day, multiple people. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different though, Chelsea, because you had more of a responsibility to this, and you probably felt a little more of a responsibility to her, which makes it really feel different and you wanted to make it better for her. And a lot of times it's just not going to be better, because there's so many patients that we deal with difficult life circumstances and health events and deaths. And it is like the beauty and the misery of our human being. There's a gamut of what people have, what people don't have, what they have access to, what they don't have access to. And sometimes I'll walk into a patient's home and I'll just go, wow, I don't even know where to begin. And you just kind of like, you can only triage and you can only do so much in a patient's life. And I think that you showing up for this girl at a really critical time is going to be her center. Like I think she will be able to look back on the death of her mother, knowing that she was really supported by somebody. And even if you're not in her life, a year from now, to have an adult in your life that shows up for you when you need them is one of the most important things for a kid, if it's your parent or not. So yeah, it's really hard to deal with like the inequities and the disparities and it's so hard. Yeah, it's just hard. It's hard.
Thank you for acknowledging that. And yeah, the inequities and the disparities, I feel like is a whole other hour of we could get into. I mean, it's just wild it's unbelievable. I'm sorry. I just get choked up if I think about it. But yeah, it was, and it was COVID and it was like, I was wanting to do this thing that was so beautiful. And of course it was. But when you talk about unexpected things, I was entering a relationship thinking, well, I have a perspective on breast cancer, and that's kind of a shared beautiful experience that I feel is horrible, of course, but I feel like I can add value here. And I wasn't anticipating a grief experience. I was anticipating more of, the breast cancer experience. And you go, oh, okay, well,
right.
This is totally different, right? And
yeah,
going to the zoo and the park and all of these things, you have to laugh. I mean, it's of course not going to make it better. I'm like, look, we're going to the zoo for 4 hours. Your mom died. It's horrible, but like, it was better than nothing. And that's so sad, but it is. I mean,
well, right. And 10-year-olds, I mean, they have this beautiful way about still playing and laughing and being joyful in spite of this major event that happened in their lives, their mother dying. I mean, they really, I don't know if it's compartmentalizing. I don't know anything about like, developmental psychology, but they just have this beauty in them. Like play is still a really integral part and an important part of living for them and processing their grief probably, right?
Yes. And they say the cutest little things. Anyways,
they're so cute. 10 is a perfect age.
Wait, how old are your kids? So your son is 23. How old is your daughter now?
Yeah. Grace is 22 almost. And LJ is 17.
Oh, wow. Oh my goodness. Did they, do they ask you questions about this? Are they like, oh, mom, how's the hospice of it all? Are they like so used to these conversations or do they shy away from it?
They actually don't like to talk about it so much. So my stories often have like bad, sad endings. So it's not like a great dinner topic. Right. It's not a great morning topic. So they don't really ask me about it too much. I think they appreciate that I do what I do, but I don't really go into depth about too many things unless it feels like something that won't totally bring them down. I mean, I don't try to shield them from it, of course, but right. They just simply don't really want to hear about it. They're open-ish.
That's fair. That's totally fair at that age. So I know we're getting close to time here. So I wanted to talk about your wonderful book. I'm so excited. Excited is a weird word anytime I describe anything in this field, but I'm so thrilled that it exists. And I'm so glad Lauren was able to send it to me and going through and just, you have such a wealth of information about all of these pockets. Can you, in your own words, tell us a little bit about the inspiration for Some Light at the End and what you hope readers can get out of reading this book?
Okay. So my inspiration for Some Light at the End a lot of it is just because, we, as nurses, we educate patients and families about the same things over and over and over again. And I wanted them to have a resource that was accessible to them. Funny though, like when I was kind of processing, what did I want to do? I wanted to do something that was kind of creative with my information that I had in my head to get it out there in the universe. So I was thinking about doing a podcast, but then I thought about talking, so much, and I thought that sounded really terrifying. And totally. Yeah, it became this really beautiful creative process. It was going to be a little pamphlet that was 22 pages, and then it turned into this 200-page book with like reflections and color. It became a very complex process. I had some really wonderful gals that helped me with it, the creative piece of it, and I wanted to provide information so my book is written to a terminally ill patient who has been diagnosed with a terminal illness. And as many of my friends have told me, probably not the best marketing move, because I don't know how many terminally ill patients would actually buy the book. But I wrote it to them because I feel like they are the most important person in this process, and they really need to make decisions about their care and who is taking care of them. And it is helpful to know what's coming down the pike so they can kind of process that. Do I want to stay at home? Do I have options to not be at home? But I thought about the family every step of the way, while I wrote this book, because family is they're the ones who take care of somebody who's dying usually. And so I wrote a lot about the dying process and what to expect, what it looks like when patients physically decline, what it looks like when they lose their appetite. And I just really normalize everything. And I just really wanted people to have a reference book that they can look at 3 a.m. when they're awake going, what do I do about dad's constipation? Like just things like that. I mean, nurses will talk at the family, and there's a point you can see their eyes just kind of gloss over and they're not able to take in any more information. So to give them something tangible, I just really wanted that for them. And that was just a soft entry into it. I mean, it's very conversational, and I share a lot of my experiences and stories. And I just didn't want it to be too clinical and too black and white. This is just how it is, so.
I think it's such a unique perspective. I'm actually so glad that point of view exists, because I think people are really afraid to talk to the dying patient themselves. It's like sometimes easier, I don't know if that's the right word, but to communicate to family members or people around them instead of, addressing head on people, perhaps specifically young people or anyone who is dying. So thank you for doing that. And what no better person to do that than someone who's had the experience that you have had. So thank you, Beth. I appreciate you being here. Where can people connect with you online if you care to share, and where can people buy your fabulous book?
They can connect with me via, I guess, Facebook or LinkedIn. And I have a website, bethcavenaugh.com, and that's mostly just about my book and my blog. And my blog has a lot of resources for people too. I mean, it has a lot of the information from the book in there. Just, how to care for your loved one when they're dying. What are the signs of the end of life? A lot of people want to know that. Yeah, and you can buy my book on Amazon and all those other places. So it's called Some Light at the End. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Beth, for writing this book, for being here, for showing up for people in the most difficult times of their life, and specifically the ends of their lives. It's so appreciated, and I just really enjoyed getting to speak with you. Is there any last words? Thank you. Is there any last closing thoughts that you wanted to end this with?
Well, you had asked about ritual, and I do think it's not important, but if you can think about the end of, if your mom or dad has been diagnosed with a terminal illness, I think it's kind of good to think about what happens when my mom does die or my dad does die in the house. Is there something that I want for her? Is there something that she wants? Does she want to be placed in a cute pair of pajamas? Is there a special blanket that would be nice to, just put over her body? Can we freshen her up? Can we put a flower on her chest? Is there songs that we can sing? Is there a chaplain that might want to come over and say a prayer? Should we have a toast? Just kind of thinking about that moment of death and the hours afterwards. A lot of people call the funeral home shortly after someone's died, which is fine. A lot of people don't want to have the body in their home, and that's okay too. But if it sometimes I think it's meaningful and helpful for the grief process to have some kind of a ritual where something that you can hold on to, years down the road and remember, like, oh yeah, like my mom, she was like, for us, I mean, we had my mom and we had a blanket over her, and that was kind of it. I mean, I didn't really think about much, but we'd put her in pajamas, and I just remember doing that with my sister, and that felt really important to me. It was simple, but it feels important now.
Wonderful. I appreciate you sharing that. So thank you so much, Beth, for that reminder. Yodo, you only die once.